Well, there was no doubt in my mind that they were installed to record things for posterity, for the Nixon Library. The president was very conscious of that kind of thing. We had quite an elaborate setup at the White House for the collection and preservation of documents and of things which transpired in the way of business of state.
On whose authority were they installed, Mr. Butterfield?
On the president's authority by way of Mr. Haldeman and Mr. Higbee.
The president instruct Mr. Haldeman, and Mr. Haldeman instruct Mr. Higbee, who in turn instructed you?
Mr. Haldeman instructed Mr. Higbee to tell me, and as I said earlier, I was the liaison with the Secret Service. It would be proper for me to give the instruction to the Secret Service.
During your tenure at the White House, as far as your own knowledge is concerned, who else knew about the presence of these recording devices?
The president, Mr. Haldeman, Mr. Higbee, and I. Plus the Secret Service people who I would prefer not to name in this public hearing, and that this kind of thing is a part of their profession.
Ah, something going down there.
What do you think's happening there? You think Butterfield knows something?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe a little bit. Hey, before we get started, I did want to say in memoriam, Dr. Cyril Wecht just passed away yesterday. He was a luminary, not only in the JFK world, but probably one of the greatest pathologists in the history of our country. I mean, in all the cases. And I just wanted to mention that we had the honor to meet him in 2022. I was able to interview him briefly, and it's a loss. He was 93 years old, but still it's always a loss. And the second thing I wanted to bring up is last week we had Robert Groden on, and Robert Groden is selling his book, but they are having to do it independently out of their house. And let's just say they got hundreds and hundreds of emails and are completely overwhelmed. And I believe they even have to go restock and get more books. So please, if you're not getting a response, just wait. You'll eventually get a response. And I don't want to be rude, but please don't ping Mark and myself, because there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. We just wanted to let you guys know.
Yeah, she'll eventually fulfill the orders. It's just that it's just him and his wife. They're seniors. They're in their 70s. They're kind of Luddites like myself, and she went back and bought some more books to fulfill the orders. So I think she's filled maybe half of them. But I know people want a response. She can't respond to each individual email and say, how's it going? How's the weather? But she's desperately trying to fill the orders.
Yeah, she was pretty frazzled when I heard from her yesterday in the email. So folks, just please be patient. Please be patient. And just assume might be a couple of weeks, but it's in there. It's in the hopper.
Yeah, it's in the hopper.
You'll get there. Now, let's move forward to past the Kennedy assassination to...
Well, don't be so sure. There may be overlaps.
Okay. Sorry. I spoke.
There may be some overlaps, bro.
Okay. I'll never.
You're right.
You're past anyone.
You're right.
I believe we're talking about this fellow here today.
Well, let me just say this. We're going to get into Watergate, but we're going to take piece by piece, because it's too big, Eric, to take on as a whole thing. So what we're going to do is what we do with JFK. We're going to take it into little baby bites and do episodes on every single freaking person involved in this thing, including the president, including the vice president, including Woodward, including Bernstein, and each individual burglar. And we'll eventually work through as many of these and probably have trading cards, if I'm not mistaken, at some point. This has a lot of resonance to today, which is why we want to do it. It's you'll see as this unfolds how there's so many dots that are connected philosophically, theoretically, directly, politically to what's going on today, and that's why we wanted to do it. Plus, it's the 50th anniversary. In August of 1974 was when Nixon resigned, and we're coming up on August in 2024, which is kind of why this was in my back burner of my mind about a year ago. This may take us a year, Eric, just to do these guys.
Well, it's just like JFK. We were hoping that we were going to start the Oswald series and on the 60th, and didn't quite work out. We're still working on that, but it's funny how these anniversaries are lining up with our show. It's just this crazy overall timing.
Well, we'll get to RFK at some point in 2028, I assume, for the 50th of that. Yes. But let me just say something about Alexander Butterfield, who was a dirty, filthy rat. And that was some performance by Butterfield. They're acting naive, like he didn't know anything about it. Butterfield ratted everyone out, not under oath, not questioned, in a backroom situation. John Dean, and we're not going to get completely into Watergate, because I want to focus on Woodward today specifically. And Woodward is not all Watergate, people. So we're going to go off of Watergate because we're focusing on Woodward. We're going to get into his books and some of the other things that are Woodward's work. So it's not all Watergate for each individual. It may be other things that they're related to. And not all these people had Watergate as their complete lives. Or we're going to get into Gerald Ford and his relation to Watergate and the pardoning of Nixon. So, I mean, there's different tangential things here related to each person. But just specifically about Alexander Butterfield, and he'll have his own episode. This guy was a rat. And John Dean did not know this, but according to sources from talking to Butterfield, John Dean hinted in his testimony behind closed doors that there might be a taping system in the White House. He had no knowledge of this physically, John Dean, because only Ehrlichman, Haldeman, and Nixon knew about it. But somebody else knew about it. That was Alexander Haig. And Haig's aide was Alexander Butterfield, both Alexanders together. Alexander Butterfield, in a letter, ratted out the taping system, but the letter was to Fred Thompson. Fred Thompson, the Republican senator, stupidly gave the letter to the Democratic investigators, who nearly shit their pants when they found out there was a taping system. This performance by Butterfield is merely a performance. They already knew from this letter that there was a taping system in the White House. And Butterfield confirms this. And you say, who is Alexander Butterfield? He was a sky blazer. I don't know if anybody ever heard of a sky blazer. He was, I know, just to give you some color background on what a sky blazer was. Sky blazer was a jet plane acrobat. The ones who do the jet formation acrobatic stuff. He
was a stunt pilot, essentially.
Well, he was a stunt pilot after he did 98 combat missions in Vietnam. Ooh. And won every single medal known to man.
That's called balls of steel.
Oh, no, absolutely. He does have balls of steel, and he becomes the chief assistant to H.R. Haldeman. And he then is in the White House. He comes out of Australia, where he was just doing time over there, doing nothing. And he writes to his old friend from UCLA, who went to school with him, H.R. Haldeman, and says, do you have a job for me in the White House? And he becomes the assistant to H.R. Haldeman. Just to give you a lineage of where all these cats are coming from, they all have different lines of power within the White House. And we're going to get into that. But just to give the background, because a lot of people, before we get into Woodward, a lot of people don't understand what the break-in was. So let's get into just the break-in itself, Eric, and the people involved in the break-in of Watergate. Watergate itself was it was a hotel. It was an office complex, but it was also super expensive condominiums. The Attorney General of the United States, John Mitchell, had a condominium there. Marie Stans had a condominium there. The head of the RNC had a condominium there. People lived in these huge condominiums. This is the entire complex.
It was also a business park too, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's why the DNC was there. That was part of the business park of it. The DNC rented offices there. The Federal Reserve Bank was on the 8th floor offices, Eric. There was all kinds of different things there. The people who were doing business there were either living there or not living there. There was a guy who lived there named Bob Woodward. And Woodward had,
but of course,
I mean, everybody lived in this complex. I mean, it's really bizarre that nobody's ever done a study or a map or grid of. I just like to see an overlay of every single thing that was in the Watergate.
Yeah, like a little office chart when you walk in a building, like all the names.
Yeah, it's not even an office chart. I mean, Woodward talks about. Just to get into Woodward for a second about how he signaled Deep Throat. He said that he put this flower pot on the terrace, again, getting into the physics of the building, put this flower pot on the terrace. And if the flower pot was in the front of the terrace, he would meet with Deep Throat. Well, it turns out his apartment faced a courtyard. And if Deep Throat wanted to see that potted plant, he would have had to have gotten into the courtyard and looked straight up into the air, into a cylinder, and seen absolutely freaking nothing. He also talks about how Deep Throat would leave him a notation on page 20 of his New York Times newspaper delivered to his apartment door saying when to meet. The apartment did not have delivery door to door. The Times were delivered to the lobby, and everybody had to go down and get their newspaper. That was a crock of shit. The original draft of the book, All the President's Men, had no mention of Deep Throat. The editors suggested that they create a character called Deep Throat for the book, and it appears in the first draft of the book, not in the original draft of the book.
Interesting.
So these are just some of the things we're going to get into, just to tease your appetite as to how there's so much bullshit surrounding this. This project is the ultimate combination of Hollywood, media, and politics. And it's also the first, and it's also the largest, and it's also the most successful, because at one point you have Robert Redford calling up Bernstein and Woodward interested in buying the book. The book is written way before Nixon resigns. The book is written, and Redford is calling them on the phone, and they're not even returning his calls. That's how much they gave a shit about Robert Redford. No, seriously. I mean, they, had the book deal. They got paid $55,000 for the book. David Obst was the literary agent. I knew his wife, Linda Obst. She's a huge producer in Hollywood. She had nothing to do with this, but Linda Obst is a movie producer. David Obst would later get divorced from her. He was a literary agent for the boys. And when I say the boys, I mean they were 28 and 27 years of age, or 28 and 29. They were very young when they were doing this. Bernstein, which is going to have his own episode, so I don't want to get into too much into Bernstein because he's fascinating and completely separate from Bob Woodward. And Bob Woodward grows up in Wheaton, Illinois, and he is on the football team. His father's a big Republican. His father becomes a huge judge. His father gets divorced from his mother at the age of 12, and somehow, I guess the mother might have been a drunk or something. The father ends up with custody of all three kids, which is rare. Yeah, I mean, think about that at that time. The father is the judge, ends up with the three kids. He remarries, and they have three kids. So now there's six kids. It's like this 8 is enough kind of thing with two different
blended family.
Yes, it's a blended family. And he feels kind of less than in Wheaton, Illinois. He will later write a book, which we'll get into in this episode, about another guy 6 years later who is also on the football team, 6 years after him, with the same football coach from Wheaton, Illinois, and that's John Belushi.
That's the connection.
Okay. Yeah, that is the connection, but there's more to the connection than meets the eye. Woodward gets a call. Let's just get into the break-in so we can get this on the record. The break-in occurs in June 18th, I believe, in 1972. Eric, I think it is June 17th. Let me take it back. June 17th. Now, there's been four prior break-in attempts at the Watergate. 4. There's 2 in May and 1 in June. 1 in June. This is the 4th one. They are attempting to get caught. They literally talk to the guards on the other 3. They sign in the guest book on 1. McCord is going up to the Federal Reserve.
Democratic officials today.
Go ahead. You got something there on the?
Yeah, I do.
Run that.
I thought it was muted in the background.
Yeah, maybe that'll explain it easier.
All right, hang on. Let's get that going.
They held a series of meetings to talk about tighter security at the national headquarters here in Washington. They admit there isn't much they can do about the break-ins, but they hope to come up with something.
The burglars broke through a fire escape door that led to the committee's offices. Some campaign memoranda was found on one of the suspects, apparently taken from this office of youth affairs. But party officials say no security files were touched. Most of the offices, including that of Chairman Lawrence O'Brien, have been checked for electronic bugs, and none has been found. One of the suspects, James McCord, operates his own security company in Washington. He was doing work for the Republican National Committee and the committee to re-elect President Nixon. Officials of both groups say McCord was fired today.
Frankly, I was surprised and dismayed, as I'm certain many others were when they read the story or heard the story or watched it on television.
Well, you are in favor of a wide open investigation of the whole thing.
Oh, yes. I think until we know the facts, it's rather difficult to respond. Certainly, we deplore it, but the fact remains that one of the five was a Republican National Committee employee. And frankly, I would like the facts laid on the table and let the chips fall where they may.
No one has proved that the Republicans are behind the break-in, but tomorrow the Democrats are expected to file some sort of legal action against the GOP anyway. Robert Endicott, NBC News, Washington.
There we go.
Okay, so they had broken into, this starts back with the creation of the Plumbers Unit by Haldeman and Ehrlichman and John Dean. John Dean oversees the Plumbers Unit. John Dean is the one who brings and hires Gordon Liddy. John Dean is the one that hires E. Howard Hunt of the Central Intelligence Agency. Both McCord and Hunt had retired 2 or 3 times, quote unquote, retired from the CIA. Most recently in 1970, both of them retired, which usually is indicative of going deep cover. When you retire from the CIA, which they've done individually 3 times, Hunt and McCord. McCord is CIA, also James McCord has an office in there, and he famously has a plaque from the head of the CIA on his wall, wishing him a great retirement from Richard Helms, which is kind of funny. And he put that up there as to hammer the fact that he was retired from the CIA. It was a crock of shit. Anyway, so Liddy gets hired. Liddy comes in and presents Operation Gemstone, multi-million-dollar intelligence operation that is going to try to stick it to the Democrats, who have launched numerous dirty tricks against Nixon over the years. And finally, they want to take the gloves off. And here's Liddy, and we've done an episode on Liddy. Yep. Liddy is not CIA. Liddy is not privy to the plot that's going to happen. Liddy is an ex-FBI agent. Liddy is an ex-assistant DA from Dutchess County, as we covered in the episode.
And a maniac.
And a complete maniac. So Liddy comes in and presents a multi-million-dollar proposal in front of John Mitchell. Operation Gemstone, Topaz, Sapphire, and Mitchell is appalled, to say the least, appalled as the Attorney General. He had recently left, which is probably the biggest political mistake in the Nixon's history, was having the Attorney General leave and become head of the re-election committee, committee to re-elect the president. Because he loses the control of the Justice Department, which will be a turnover of firing different people in the Justice Department, which we'll get into when we get into that. But Liddy presents this insane program involving drugging, kidnapping, dirty tricks, wiretapping, prostitutes, the usual stuff. And he is told by John Dean, who is his boss, the counsel to the president, that this would be approved. And it's so crazy that Mitchell tells him to take a walk. The scaled down version of that leads to the breaking in of Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's safe to get dirt on Daniel Ellsberg. They are so appalled by the leak of the Pentagon Papers, even though it has more to do with Johnson and Kennedy. Kissinger says to Nixon, who says what I just said, Kissinger says to Nixon, Mr. President, it's going to make you look weak, very weak, unless you do something with this man. And so Kissinger is pushing to do something. This is a young Henry Kissinger with a guy named Kramer. We're going to get into this guy, Fritz Kramer. Fritz Kramer is the geopolitical brain behind the worldview of Henry Kissinger and Alexander Haig and others. in the beginning of what's later to be called the neocon movement. Fritz Kramer is the inventor of the neocon movement, by the way. He'll get his own episode. Very complicated fellow. But getting back to what I was saying before, the burglary of Ellsberg's psychiatrist's safe, Feldman or Feldschuh, I think it was, I forget his name, out here in L.A., was the first real dirty trick by the plumbers. And this was justified because Ellsberg, according to everyone, was, I don't even know how to define this, but was a sexual deviant. And that's what's bandied about on the tapes, according to Kissinger. And is a loose cannon, obviously, and they believe a traitor and guilty of treason, and not wrongfully so. I mean, this goes to the Supreme Court of the United States, this release and printing of the Pentagon Papers, Eric. And in there, it shows the plans for the war coming apart early in 1962, 63, 64, that the war is unwinnable. This has nothing to do with Nixon, however, because he just got there, and he's trying to end the war, strength through peace, right, Eric? I mean, this was what he was attempting to do. This is Ellsberg. We showed him in a previous episode, some debate about what that gun was, some sort of a Dutch machine gun or something that he carried.
It's very forward-thinking gun, very modern.
Yeah. He got into the bush. I mean, he was out there with Donovan, right? Wasn't he in a Donovan episode?
Yes, I think he was brought up.
That's right. He was a protege of Donovan, William Donovan. There's a couple of proteges of Donovan involved in this episode who end up being CIA and start off with William Donovan and OSS, which we'll get into. But I mean, this situation, getting back to the break-in at the psychiatrist's office, this leads to other break-ins and other attempts to wiretap. And Nixon, who is not privy to the break-in, by the way. Oh, he is privy to the break-in of the Ellsberg safe. In fact, on the tapes, he's told by Haldeman that he authorized it, and he doesn't remember having authorized it, which is not bizarre because he's authorized a million things, Eric. You know what I mean? So he said, I authorized that? And he goes, yeah, you did. And he goes, all right, whatever. You know what I mean? He authorized the break-in. But Haldeman had created an entire gatekeeping situation where nobody got to Nixon other than going through Haldeman. He was the ultimate gatekeeper. Right, but not in this particular case, because Haldeman and Ehrlichman were both Christian Scientists. They had both, they were a little weird. And Nixon had a problem with alcohol. And Haldeman famously said, I'm not going to be involved with your reelection if you're going to drink. I'm not doing it anymore. And I mean, the legendary problem of Nixon with alcohol had trickled down to Haldeman and Ehrlichman as Christian Scientists, and they did not want to work for this guy. He had a lot of problems. His wife was an alcoholic. He beat the living shit out of her on numerous occasions, gave her black eye, sent to the we'll get into that later when we get into Pat Nixon's story, but he would get drunk and become another person, Eric, after 2 martinis. So in fact, the speech he gives where he says you're not going to have Nixon to kick around anymore after losing to Pat Brown in 1962 in California, he'd been up all night drinking, and they were trying to prevent him from getting out on that stage. And he went through a side door, grabbed the microphone, the press was there, and he makes that whole speech. I don't know if you have that, but it might be a little snippet of it.
In years, ever since the Hiss case, you've had a lot of fun. A lot of fun. You've had an opportunity to attack me, and I think I've given as good as I've taken.
Yeah, no, he was pretty loose-lipped at that press conference. They were just like, yeah, he was going on. They were just trying to pull him off the stage at that point. But you know, that's when he goes into the wilderness, so to speak, in 62 to 68. That's the period of time when he's in the wilderness, as people call it. But getting back to Robert Upshur, I don't even know what this names mean. Upshur is his middle name. Robert Upshur Woodward graduates. He goes to Yale University. Getting back to our subject for today, he goes to Yale University, and his professor at Yale calls him a crypto-fascist upon meeting him. He's an extreme right-wing Republican, as his father is, out of the Midwest, very straight, very quiet, very introverted. And he goes to Yale and he graduates, I think with a degree in history, and he joins the Navy. The Yale, he didn't join the Navy. Let me take that back. He goes on an ROTC scholarship to Yale. So they pay for his Yale education. And because of that, he now is obligated to go in 1965 into the shit. And into the shit for him means going on board a naval vessel as a junior lieutenant, Eric. I mean, if that makes any sense. He will later become a full lieutenant. And he's on board a ship called the USS Wright. And you say, well, how complicated could this be? He's in war. He's got 4 years. He's got to do some work on the USS Wright, like every other sailor. There's plenty of sailors out there who were in the Vietnam War. He poo-poos this in all his bios, saying, yeah, I was on board a ship. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't wait to get out of the Navy, begin my life. I was against the war and everything else. And he says he was aboard a Navy ship off the coast of Vietnam. He was later on another ship called the Fox, the USS Fox and the USS Wright. And you just go, well, how complicated could the USS Wright be? You know, what could he do? He's just a sailor, right? So apparently the USS Wright, which is shown here, people should take a look at this because this is a ship that you've never heard of. And this is kind of what I wanted to get into in this episode. It's in mothballs now, but the USS Wright, named after the Wright brothers, there was another one, I think, for Orville Wright or something. But this USS Wright, if you look at those antennas, they're over 100 feet high, and they could withstand winds up to 150 miles an hour. There's a ton of them on there. This is a ship that nobody knows about that I'm going to explain to you right now, and this is why you watch this channel. This is an organization, a program called NECPA, National Emergency Command Post Afloat, Eric. Before they put the president up in the air in case of a nuclear war, they had the president on board this vessel right here. This is a floating situation room. This is where the president of the United States, just like Mount Weather or Mount Hood, or later being put in a plane flying above in a nuclear war, this USS Wright was a nuclear command vessel for the president of the United States. Nobody knows about this. And the guy who was the communication watch officer aboard that vessel was Bob Woodward. And Bob Woodward was the one who had crypto level security clearance. He was the one who translated the codes. He decoded all the messages. Give an example of what this ship did. It went down to Uruguay one time with LBJ on board. In 1965, there was some incident and there was some attempt to possibly get LBJ on board the USS Wright and bring him back up from Uruguay. This was a vessel designed for nuclear war. This is how important Bob Woodward's naval career was that he refuses to talk about. Not only was he on board the National Emergency Command Post afloat, he commanded men who decoded the messages from all around the earth coming into this vessel. The vessel and the system will later be eradicated because it becomes obsolete, Eric, because satellite technology let the enemy target a ship like this and blow it out of the water. Eric, imagine. So this system that we had in place that was top secret called NECPA was later obsoleted out because of technology itself. But at this time in 1965, 66, 67, 68, who is running this code room? None other than Bob Woodward. So he does his 4 years aboard this and the USS Fox, which was a missile frigate, by the way, that saw some action in Vietnam. This is Woodward on board the USS Wright, the commander of it. He will later become involved with a commander named Admiral Thomas Mora. So when this system of 4 years is up, you get a 5th year on your ROTC scholarship. They need you for 5 years. Some debate whether you can opt out or not. My understanding is you got to do the 5th year as well as part of your commitment for the scholarship, Eric. You know? It
depends. Yeah. You know what your degree is, and if you get a master's, there's
Okay, but we know what did happen to him. What did happen to him was he was sent to a place called the Pentagon. This is the Washington Post Cub reporter, my friends. He is sent to the Pentagon where he is trained as a briefer, and he works under the tutelage of Admiral Thomas Mora. And you go, well, who was Admiral Thomas Mora? How big can this guy be? Well, he was the chief naval officer of the entire Navy. Thomas Mora became the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, just so people know who he is. And Bob Woodward worked beneath him. This is Thomas Mora. He's the head of the U.S. Navy. Let me put it that way right now. Chief of Naval Operations. I think it's called CNO, Eric. Chief of Naval Operations.
It could be. I'm not deep on Navy, but
there's naval people out there who probably know this. Anyway, so he goes to the Pentagon, and what is his job at the Pentagon? His job at the Pentagon is to go to the White House, and brief people at the White House on what's going on at the Pentagon. Now, what is he doing at the Pentagon? At the Pentagon, he's working with a thing called the Spectro 70. You'd like this, Eric. This is good. The Spectro 70 was the first mega computer in the Pentagon. The Spectro 70 computer took in intel from all over the world for all the different agencies, CIA, NSA, ONI. Woodward is obviously ONI at this point. And the intelligence comes in, and who decides where it's going to go? Because it's coming into one central location, to the Spectro 70 computer. Somebody's got to decide who's going to get each memo. You know who that was? Bob Woodward, third base. Bob Woodward is now the guy decoding every crypto telegram and message coming in and deciding which agency to send it to. He looks at it and goes, oh, NSA. Phew, right to NSA. Looks at it, woo, ONI. That's Bob Woodward. That's what he's doing. He becomes a briefer, and I'll give you an example of who a briefer was. There was a guy named Fletcher Prouty. Fletcher Prouty was the Bob Woodward of the Air Force. Fletcher Prouty was the briefer of Air Force Joint Chiefs of Staff, guys on the staff. Woodward is trained to do this job and to go to the White House every day and brief. And who does he brief at the White House? A guy that he vehemently denies ever briefing. And the guy he's briefing vehemently denies that he was being briefed by him, almost like they protest so much as to make it insane. There are two guys protesting about this briefing when they simply could have said, I briefed a lot of guys. You know, I briefed this guy, that guy, I briefed a lot of guys. That's not the way Woodward has handled it. The guy's name is General Alexander Haig. And there's a reason why they've covered this up for so long. Because I will tell you right now, and we're going to get into this, General Alexander Haig, my friends, was deep throat. And here he is. This is the guy who undermined the presidency of the United States. This is a guy, just to backtrack, General Haig represented with Admiral Mora and others in the military complete fear of Nixon opening up the gate to China and the ABM treaties with the Soviet Union. They believed that Nixon had to be eliminated. And the only way to eliminate it was through this system of Watergate. Nixon is going to win the election, as we pointed out, taking every single electoral vote in the United States except the state of Massachusetts. This is after giving him, I think, his fourth star. He jumped over from a 2-star to a 4-star, going over 250 other generals. The situation with Haig is that Haig and Woodward knew each other for years, and he would go in and brief Haig all the time. Who is Haig's other henchman? Alexander Butterfield and Higbee. There's a plot in the White House, a military plot to take down the president of the United States. Now, how do we know that it was a plot? Because there's a name for the plot, Eric. There was a plot called the Mora-Radford plot. The Mora-Radford plot involved Admiral Thomas Mora and Yeoman Charles Radford. Yeoman Charles Radford was a kid who was ordered by Mora to go through the garbage, the burn bags, and everything he could get his hands on in the White House. Yeoman Charles Radford, was caught, and both Mora and Radford confessed to being part of this military spy ring to take down Richard Nixon. And this has already been established historically. There's documents that I have tape recordings. And you say, well, what does he have to do with this thing here, Woodward? He worked directly and reported directly to Thomas Mora, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The reason they did this is because when Nixon came to power with Kissinger, they boxed out every single person. He wanted to flex the muscles of executive power, Eric. And where have we heard that before? Everything about China was a secret. Everything about the Soviets was a secret. So the spy ring formed out of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to find out what the hell was going on in Nixon's White House. The only two people who knew were Nixon and Kissinger. They were sworn, both of them swore each other to secrecy that they would not reveal their international diplomacy plans of meeting with Chairman Mao and meeting with the Soviets and developing the SALT talks. These two secrets drove the Pentagon insane, totally insane. So General Haig shows up. General Haig is brought in. He's recommended by a guy named Califano, who used to work for LBJ. Califano will come into this story because who is Joseph Califano? He'll later be head of HEW, but Joseph Califano was the lawyer for the Washington Post. He was also the lawyer for an organization called the DNC. He represented both. And he was the one that brought in, recommended Alexander Haig into the Nixon White House. Now, Nixon was so enamored by Haig, who was a super duper war hero. You can't take anything away from what Haig did in Vietnam and what Haig did in Korea. However, he was also a narcissistic megalomaniac working for the Pentagon internally and spying on him. And he is the one that will be Deep Throat. The idea that Mark Felt was named as Deep Throat at the end of his life, he was completely Alzheimer'd out and needed money for a book, and they did it out of the courtesy of their hearts. He was second in command at the FBI, but you could tell by the information that Haig is revealing that he's inside the White House. There's stuff that Felt had no privy to and had no connection to that Alexander Haig does. And the relationship, the reason they have fought so hard and have named Mark Felt as Deep Throat is to distract from General Alexander Haig actually being Deep Throat and trying to overthrow the government of the United States in a 7 days in May, Burt Lancaster general type coup d'etat, which is what happened with Nixon here. Well, everything else, the break-in was done on purpose. Getting caught was done on purpose. This was a CIA operation from day one to take down Nixon from the CIA. That's why Nixon goes and confronts Dick Helms over in Langley, Eric. He goes over there and just says, it's got to stop. All of this bullshit about them ordering the CIA to stop the FBI, everything. This was a CIA plot from everybody involved here. If you look at the guys involved, Frank Sturgis, Virgilio Gonzalez, Eugenio Martinez, Bernard Barker, James McCord, all worked for the CIA. They were not part of a plumber's unit. These were not Liddy's men. These were E. Howard Hunt's men. E. Howard Hunt worked for a company, a phony PR company called Mullen and Company. You guys can look this up at home. Here are the five guys left to right. James McCord, who is really the ringleader here. James McCord was the head of security on paper for the RNC, for the committee to reelect the president. He said, I have to go into Mitchell's apartment to make sure there are no bugs in the apartment. And he put bugs in Mitchell's apartment in the Watergate. He had been in there so many times bugging apartments of people in the White House. McCord was CIA. These three guys, Gonzalez and Martinez and Barker, and Sturgis too, but Barker and Gonzalez and McCord, Martinez rather, were all part of the Bay of Pigs operation, as was James McCord. These were all people from the Bay of Pigs. These were all people who were reporting to a guy who ran the Bay of Pigs operation. The guy's name, General Alexander Haig. And that's why you never hear about Haig, because Haig came up with the plan for the Bay of Pigs, Eric. I know.
Now, how long have you known all this?
Well, I've known parts of it for a number of years.
Okay.
I have known about most of this my whole life. But The reason, as I said at the beginning of the episode, this is the first major confluence of media, Hollywood, and politics. It is a three-sided killer dragon that overthrows the president of the United States. Now you say, why didn't they just kill him? Well, in 1972, they tried 2 times to assassinate Nixon. First one was in Key Biscayne. Second one was Miami Beach when he spoke before the veterans against the war at the convention speech. Edwin Kaiser was a CIA assassin. Frank Sturgis was involved in this. Frank Sturgis walked away from the assassination of Nixon because he didn't want to be involved with domestic politics and domestic political assassination, according to Frank Sturgis. Now, Frank Sturgis was a mad dog killer. There's a picture of Frank Sturgis I sent you.
Oh, there's a few of them.
Okay, well, there's one where he's standing on a hill. This one here, Frank Sturgis there. This is in Cuba, 1959. He's working for, fighting for Castro. He's fighting for Castro on the Castro side. This mountain is a grave, a mass grave of Batista officials who were executed by the Castro people in a firing squad. I think he's standing on about 17 bodies there. That's Frank Sturgis, a.k.a. Frank Fiorino, really Italian American, came out of Staten Island, I think, and also Maryland and Philly. I think he was born in Philly, later lived in New Jersey. He goes down. He's involved with arms running with Jack Ruby. Ruby and him are running guns to Castro's men. Again, getting back to JFK. Nixon knew about this. This is multiple shots of Frank Sturgis. Frank Sturgis was a killer, my friend, and he was a soldier of fortune working for CIA. Anyway, so these guys were involved in Bay of Pigs and stuff the CIA used. When they arrest these burglars, Martinez, one of the burglars you just showed, had a key around his neck. The key is on a rope, a string, and he tries to eat the key on a string. This guy here, this is Martinez, CIA Bay of Pigs operative out of Miami, Operation 40, going back. Again, this is stuff that predates Nixon, but begins with Nixon as vice president under Eisenhower. It's later perpetuated in Operation Mongoose. It's later perpetuated by RFK, despite what his son might say, that his dad wasn't involved. His dad was involved in this up to his neck. The attempt at the break-in, like I said, this was the 4th time because they attempted to get caught each time. These guys were veteran wiretappers, veteran break-in guys. There was no way that they should have gotten caught at the Watergate. They intended to get caught. That was what they were up to. The first 3 attempts, they did not get caught. Across the way in the Holiday in Howard Johnson's hotel is E. Howard Hunt and Gordon Liddy. And they're monitoring the situation across the street, watching with binoculars, as you kind of see in the movie. And they leave when the arrest happens, when these guys are arrested, Liddy and Hunt bolt from the hotel room, and they leave behind. This is amazing thing. They leave behind a briefcase in the hotel room with their names on it and all this crap in the briefcase. It's got $4,600 in cash, $100 bills, sequential serial numbers that match the serial numbers, sequential serial numbers of the Watergate burglars, who have $800 on them, $800, $260, $260, $800, all in hundreds, Eric, with sequential serial numbers peeled off by someone who gave them this money, albeit G. Gordon Liddy or E. Howard Hunt. So it was almost like they get the address book from the burglars. They get the address book. What's in the address book? E. Howard Hunt's private phone number at the White House. It says E. Howard Hunt, White House, 213-876-4222. I mean, it's a setup. It's a setup. These guys are supposed to be caught. So they're dragged into court and they're arraigned in court. The judge says to them, what's going on here, boys? You're charged with burglary and Well, this is later on, I think, but this is Hunt or
Yeah, Hunt in front of Congress or in court. I don't know.
No, but I'm just talking about the arraignment for the burglary, the simple
Okay.
burglary, late night, the night court arraignment with the judge. The judge says to him, "What do you guys do for a living?" And the court says, "I have a security company," which is true. He does have a security company. And he says, "For who?" And he says, "Well, I do security for the government." He goes, "What department?" And here's where Woodward, according to Woodward, moves down to the first row and overhears James McCord say the magic letters CIA to the judge. Why he had to do this, nobody's ever explained why James McCord felt that he had to say out loud in court that he worked for the CIA. And the judge goes, "What?" and hence, the reason I mention this is this begins the ball rolling of Woodward's realizing he's got a tiger by the tail. But he already knows he's got a tiger by the tail because they've been warned about this break-in for a number of months that these break-ins were happening at the Watergate. So get back to the key around Martinez's neck. Why is there a key around this guy's neck? Well, there's a key that opens a drawer in the secretary's desk. Now, the secretary's desk is outside of the office of O'Brien, the head of the DNC. O'Brien is Larry O'Brien is the head of the DNC. He'll hold many different positions in the Democratic Party. But outside, there was no bugs put on Larry O'Brien's phone. People said, "Well, why not? Why didn't they bug his phone?" They bugged the receptionist's phone. Okay, dig this. And they bugged the phone, the area above the phone, like for a space tap. So they put bugs in the ceiling and they put bugs on her phone. And Martinez has the key to this desk drawer. And the key around his neck opens up that drawer. And what's in that drawer, Eric? You don't know, do you? Okay, I'll tell you. Fair enough. Inside that drawer is a series of manila envelopes. And I mean 8.5 by 12 manila envelopes with the thing that goes around the wheel with a little string. Okay. There's packets of them in there, big ones. And inside each packet is a series of 12 photos, 12 8 by 10 glossies of the hottest escorts in Washington, D.C.
Oh,
yeah.
Calling Bobby Baker.
We're going to get there. Now, the plot gets interesting because the CIA is running a honeypot program where if you go next door, there was an apartment complex next door to the Watergate that was called Columbia Plaza Apartments. Columbia Plaza Apartments, they were very nice, the government, when Arab leaders came to town, Japanese leaders came to town, Italian politicians, government officials came to town. They would give you these packet to a government official from out of the country, and they'd say, "Pick whatever girl you want," and they would pick whatever girl they wanted. And they would go to the plaza, the apartments, the Columbia Plaza apartments, and they'd have sex with one of the top escorts that they picked out of the envelope.
So it's a catalog.
Right. Unfortunately for them, the CIA filmed it through a two-way mirror, the entire event, thereby having the ability to blackmail the people who were being filmed. The other governments did it to us, and we did it to them. This went both ways. But in that drawer, which is what they were breaking into to find, were the photos. Now, why did they want those photos? There's a woman who we mentioned last week, I think, in the episode about Ted Kennedy. There was a woman named Erica Heidi Reichen, a.k.a. Kathy Dichter was her real name. But Erica Heidi Reichen was the top escort in Washington, D.C. She, I think we mentioned her being with Bobby Baker. And she was almost like the madam of this group of call girls, this high-end escort, the White House call girls, actually a book written about it called White House Call Girls. This became a scandal. There was a black book that they recovered in the desk drawer. And in that black book was a bunch of names, including Sam Dash from the Watergate Committee and a whole mess of other people who did not want their names out. Now, in the reason they were sent in to break into this drawer, they were sent in by a guy named John Dean. John Dean was the boss of G. Gordon Liddy. and they sent them in to not to wiretap Larry O'Brien's phone or to get DNC documents. Dean wanted to see who the women were in that envelope, because one of the women in there was a woman named Mo Dean, who would become his wife. Mo Biner was one who was in there as a photo, and Dean wanted to get those photos, especially the one of who will be his wife. In the middle of Watergate, by the way, he runs off to California and marries her for legal reasons. The escort, Mo Biner. This is her on the left. She's one of the top escorts as part of this call girl ring. Okay, so who is her roommate, Mo Dean? She lives with a woman named Erica Heidi Riken. You can't make this up, Eric. She's the roommate of the madam of the call girl ring. They live together, Eric. And in that black book is the name of John Dean. His name is in the black book. Anyways, this is what the break-in was about. And this is what Woodward is not interested in covering. Woodward wants to sensationalize the political. Is this Riken?
Yeah.
Yeah. She ends up being hooked up with Bobby Baker at one point, but whoa, did she have a lot of exposure, this woman.
Yeah, right there. Don't put her in the sun. She needs some lotion.
You need a lot of lotion for her. Anyway, so much more to Watergate than I thought when I turned on this show, Mark. I don't know. All of a sudden, this is a whole different program. I signed up for the Watergate episode. What the hell are you doing here?
Well, you mean the Woodward episode.
Now, we're going to get into this stuff later on in different episodes, John Dean and some other episodes. But I have to tell you this because it's not what it appears to be. These people are not who they appear to be, and they're not what they're appearing to be. What Woodward does, this is White House Call Girl, the book goes into a lot of detail. We'll go into this as an episode by itself, but I just wanted to let you know that the break-in and the burglary itself were not what they appeared to be. Nixon knows nothing about this. This is a John Dean operation. John Dean is trying to gather as much sexual intelligence information as he can for his own political power. This is in general across the board. This is John Dean's own drive to get power for himself politically, with or without Watergate. As the thing unfolds, Dean realizes that he is vulnerable legally, and that's when he turns on the president and comes up with this whole cock and bull story that the president was aware of this and paid hush money, which he did. They don't consider it hush money, and Jeff Shepard doesn't consider it hush money to pay the legal bills of the people who worked for you, which is how Jeff Shepard phrased it. The Democrats didn't phrase it like that. They phrased it as hush money. And we're hearing hush money today with Michael Cohen. That's right, with Michael Cohen and Donald Trump, third base. They phrased it that this was payoffs to Hunt and all these different guys, when in fact, they were paying their legal bills, Eric, okay? But Woodward has a friend named Scott Armstrong. I don't know if you have a picture of this guy, Scott Armstrong. Scott Armstrong grows up with him in Wheaton, Illinois. He gets Scott Armstrong a job working as an investigator for the Watergate Committee. Scott Armstrong will now become, this is him later on C-SPAN, a couple of years later. Scott Armstrong will later write books with Woodward. He will write, I think, the Supreme Court book. He's co-author on
The Brethren.
The Brethren, yeah, he will. But he grows up with him, and he gets him a job on the investigative staff of the Democrats. And he funnels, this is a picture of the front of the book, The Brethren, which we'll mention later on. He funnels secret information to Woodward from the committee. There's a person on the committee who's forging documents, and the person is fired from the committee, not Scott Armstrong. There's another person, and the person fires that person, says, they caught him red-handed, forging documents, trying to frame Nixon, trying to violate his constitutional rights. And they kick this other investigator off the Watergate Committee and writes a negative recommendation saying this person should never be trusted again. The Democratic congressman writes this thing saying this person should never be trusted with secret documents or anything of a security nature ever again, having been caught forging documents, and I've relieved the person of their duties here on the Watergate Committee. That person was Hillary Rodham Clinton.
I had a feeling.
When you read what the guy wrote about her and the lengths to his warning about her, again, this is in 1972. Holy crap. Anyway, getting back to Woodward. Woodward is briefing the General Haig, and General Haig is attempting to take down Nixon as part of this military coup. Thomas Mora, the admiral, and Radford are called in by John Ehrlichman. And John Ehrlichman, and we're going to post this on Locals afterwards, John Ehrlichman on tape, and we've got the transcripts of it, and I've got the audio of it. John Ehrlichman grills the admiral, both Wielander, who was the admiral on the USS Fox, where Woodward also served under Wielander, and Thomas Mora, who were part of the coup. He gets them to confess. This is kind of like the situation with FDR, Eric, with the plot to take down FDR back in 1932 that we covered with Smedley Butler. This is very similar to the Bankers' Revolt. This is Wielander. He must have been a captain here. Later becomes an admiral, but I think this is when he was on board the USS Fox. He's involved in the plot. This is an O&I plot to take down Nixon, and it succeeds. There's no impeachment. There's no hearing. There's no nothing. The reason that he was able to get the pardon is because of the threat that General Haig and Nixon gave to Ford about altering the Warren Commission autopsy reports. General Haig went and threatened Ford to get the pardon for Nixon, which is, we'll get into that later in the episode. But Spiro Agnew, to clear the way of the vice presidential slot, to allow two unelected officials for the first time in American history to become president and vice president, to clear out that slot, General Haig goes to see Spiro Agnew, and he says, we can do it dirty or we could do it clean. And Agnew says, are you physically threatening me? And he says, you bet your ass. So the threat to Agnew is physical from General Haig, and that's in Agnew's book. We're going to do an episode on Agnew, and Agnew feared for his life because he was threatened. And Agnew eventually gets out of the slot, which is filled by Gerald Ford, and then Gerald Ford becomes president of the United States with a pardon negotiated by General Haig. General Haig will then end up on Reagan's thing, becoming Secretary of State. General Haig was the advisor, not the advisor, he was the undersecretary under Kissinger. He was Kissinger's aide, just in the White House, in the Nixon White House. He was Kissinger's aide. And he did this to spy on Kissinger. That's why Haig was in there. They could justify this. They could say, look, they're opening up a door to China that we don't want to be opened. They're opening up an anti-ballistic missile treaty. We don't want this open. They're keeping us out of the loop. Nixon, on the other hand, says, I just won by the biggest landslide in American history. I have a model that I want to implement in the world politically, and I'm going to do it. And I'm not going to let these guys in on it. And it sounds very Trumpian of taking the troops out of Syria and the generals undermining him by not removing the troops from Syria. This is a lot of echoes to Trump people, and that's why I wanted to do this episode. General Haig will now undermine and completely send documents and information to Woodward, all through Watergate. This is where he's coming. Mark Felt doesn't know shit from Shinola. This is a story that they made up. The deep throat thing is invented by Simons, one of the editors at the Washington Post, who jokingly says on Deep Background, he keeps saying Deep Background. The style that Woodward creates, and this is a style of journalism, just so you know how he gets there, I just want to backtrack. He has no journalism skills. He has no writing skills. He does this fifth year, and this is where we are right now. This is the fifth year of his term with the United States Navy. The fourth year is aboard ship. The fifth year is in the Pentagon. And now where we get to 1969, 1970, right? And this is where he's just getting out of the Navy, August 1970. This is where we are in the story. What does he do in August 1970 when he finally gets out of the Navy? he's admitted to Harvard Law School, the most prestigious law school in America. And he says, fuck that. I'm going over to the Washington Post and demand that they hire me as a reporter. So he goes over to the Washington Post, and there's clearly a setup because a guy giving up his acceptance to Harvard Law School to go over to the Washington Post to make $97 a week covering dog shows is, of course, absurd. So he goes over to the Washington Post and sees this guy, Rosenthal. Rosenthal says, look, I don't know from nothing. I don't know who you are, how you got here. You've got no experience. I'll let you work here for no pay for 2 weeks. And he goes, all right. And it was his idea. It was actually Woodward's idea. He writes 17 articles in 2 weeks. None of them get published. They're completely illegible. So the guy says, look, I can't use you. I'm running one of the biggest newspapers in the country. You have no skills in journalism. You've never been a journalist. How about if you go see this guy, Farquhar? Go see this guy, Farquhar, over at the Montgomery County newspaper. It's a weekly suburban newspaper that's got a circulation of like 100, Eric. He sends him over to this Montgomery County newspaper, where this guy Farquhar hires him to cover different stories in Maryland and in Virginia for the newspaper, for this weekly newspaper. Does it for exactly 1 year. And he says the fix is in. He goes back. He quits like September 17th. And the next day, I think on the 19th, he gets his job at the Washington Post. Goes back to the Washington Post, and they hire him. This is now 1971, okay? Think about where we are. Watergate is 9 months away. He's yet to work at a newspaper of any sort of meaning. He's not even a journalist. 9 months after he's hired, to the day, the burglars are arrested at the Watergate, and he is assigned the story, the biggest story in the history of the United States in terms of newspaper media. Bob Woodward is given the story.
Lucky guy, just a lucky guy. And he is now going to go to court and find out that James McCord says in open court, I work for the Central Intelligence Agency. And that's where this story is at this point in terms of Watergate. And we're going to move on to certain other aspects of Bob Woodward at this time. But this is how he gets there. From being on board this super secret intelligence communication ship to the Pentagon, to a suburban newspaper, giving up Harvard Law School, to then get somebody who set him up for a job at the Washington Post. He will then meet Carl Bernstein, who has none of this background. Carl Bernstein is a veteran street reporter who has been doing this since he was 16 years of age. At this point, when Woodward meets Bernstein in 1971, 72, Bernstein has been doing this for 16 years, Eric. Mm. He starts, I'll say 14 years. He's been at the Washington Post since 1966, and he was at various newspapers before that. And Bernstein is a long-haired rock and roll a rock critic for the paper, and coke snorting, weed smoking, hard drinking, womanizing. Later marries Nora Ephron. You can watch Hunter S. Thompson.
He's Hunter S. Thompson. He's Hunter S. Thompson.
But talented.
Yes, in fact, he says, or somebody says that it's been attributed to a bunch of people, that English is Woodward's second language. That's how bad of a writer he is. In fact, in the movie, when you see Dustin Hoffman tearing off the copy sheet and reading it from Woodward, and he punches it up, and Woodward comes over and he says, this reads a lot better. You're right, because he was illiterate, Woodward. Bernstein takes it, his copy, rewrites it in supersonic time because he bled ink. Bernstein was a newspaper man. He bled ink. He rewrites it in supersonic time, and he says, I think you'll find this is better. I put your lead up here, blah, 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 blah. Woodward reads it and says, you're right. What I didn't like was the fact that you stole it and did it from behind my back. And that's how Bernstein was. when Bernstein, and we'll get into Bernstein later, I don't even want to talk about him that much, but Woodward is now being involved with this phony deep throat who is Alexander Haig. And this will lead eventually to the resignation of the president and the taking over by Haig at the end. The second book by Woodward and Bernstein on Nixon is completely given to them by Alexander Haig. Final whatchamacallit, I forget the name of the book, Final something or other. That one is the only two guys left in there are Haig and Nixon. And it's ridiculous that Haig would deny it because they're the only two sources in the book, and Nixon didn't give him an interview. And Haig denied giving Woodward an interview for the second book. Now, like when he's at Yale, by the way, you've heard of Skull and Bones, right?
Sure.
What you haven't
W's.
That's right. And everybody, it's all this stuff. It's all fun and games. Nobody's heard of Book and Snake, have you?
No, it sounds like Harry Potter.
And it's not Harry Potter. It is the Skull and Bones type organization that nobody knows about at Yale that Bob Woodward was part of. It's called Book and Snake.
Good name.
Okay, just putting that out there. Just let you know. Anyway, so he begins to cover the Watergate thing, and we'll get more into Watergate as the series goes on. But he becomes eventually the managing editor of the Washington Post. And you say, well, that's pretty good. They don't win the Pulitzer. The newspaper wins the Pulitzer, by the way. They flip out over the newspaper winning the Pulitzer because they wanted it, Woodward and Bernstein. And Bradley says, no, the paper needs it more than you do. And yeah. And they fucked them. And there were other writers who wrote on it. I mean, there's Seymour Hersh was writing about it for the New York Times. There's other people doing coverage on Watergate. But he becomes the managing editor of the Washington Post, the metropolitan section, Woodward. Bernstein gets the book, gets the money, cashes out, goes to New York, and parties like it's 1999. Goes completely berserk, Bernstein, which we'll get into in the Bernstein episode. But when Woodward says to a bunch of people he's really still a registered Republican, Eric, and he uses, his father was a naval officer as well, but he uses his Republicanism to open a lot of doors during the investigation, saying, when he's interviewing people from the Nixon administration, he keeps saying, I am a registered Republican still. And he's kind of like a liberal Republican, kind of a Rockefeller Republican, but he has like a bleeding heart for affirmative action programs. Okay. And he hires a chick named Janet Cook. I don't know if you have a picture of this chick, Janet Cook, this black chick. And she is a reporter for the Washington Post. She will win a Pulitzer Prize for writing a story about an
She just won.
I think she just won right there. That's probably the photo. Yeah. she 1981. This is 1981. She wins a Pulitzer Prize for writing a long piece about a 8-year-old black heroin addict in the ghettos of DC. And the story goes into the paper, and she gets a Pulitzer Prize. I mean, it's that good. It's that good. And he feels like this was his protege, that he took this black woman and made her, which he did, which he really did. And it's like a feather in his cap, Eric, as you can imagine. Unfortunately for Woodward, she made the entire story up. And shut up. Unfortunately for Woodward, she made the entire story up. And the Pulitzer Prize is stripped from her in one of the most undignified journalistic events in American history. And he is ridiculed by the rest of the newspaper. They come over to his house and they have like a cutting session against him, saying, how could you let this happen? You destroyed the credibility of the entire newspaper, because he's not a paper guy. He's a deep state operative. And she has made up the entire fucking story. There is no 8-year-old kid. There is, and the guy who outs, this is great. The guy who outs Woodward and outs the story.
I hear it coming.
No, you're dead. You're dead. Is the guy who says, this is a great story. Let's go over and meet the kid and the mom and get the kid some help. And his name is Marion Barry. He's the crack addicted. You didn't see that coming.
No, I thought it was Bernstein. That would have been
no. It's Marion Barry, the crack addicted mayor who says, this is a great story. Let's go find the kid. And they check her bio. She said she went to Vassar and apparently UPI or Associated Press, whenever someone wins the Pulitzer Prize, I didn't know this, does a deep dive on the bio of the person and writes an article about it. And they went to write the article and they went to check on her. Again, this is the greatest investigative reporter in American history, Bob Woodward, didn't even bother to check the chick's background. AP and UPI does a story. She made up her own background, college background, made up the story of the 8-year-old, made up the story of the whole cock and bull story, loses the Pulitzer Prize, and it goes to the second woman, the second woman who should have won it in the first place. So it was I forgot what story she wrote, but it was some story that somebody else wrote that was really good.
A real story.
I mean, no, totally real story. And that woman wins the 1981 Pulitzer Prize in journalism, having it stripped away from Janet Cook, who will later go to Europe, marry some diplomat, and end up bagging groceries in LA or something. Janet Cook. I think she's still alive.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I mean, so then things worked out appropriately. It seems like half the time, you get somebody and they're a plagiarist or they make things up, and years down the road, they're president of the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that could happen.
So at least, you're like, okay, well, that's what we would expect to happen. Like I imagine who was it? Jason Glass isn't working much anymore, I hope.
Stephen Glass, I think.
Stephen Glass, sorry.
Right, yeah, same thing. And there was also Jason Blair.
That was a
crackhead. Yeah, it was a crackhead for the New York Times, who the Southern editor of the New York Times had also a liberal bleeding heart and hired him. And he just smoked crack in the bar below his apartment, emailing in these stories. So that was another similar thing, but there was no Pulitzer Prize involved with that. Right, this one involving Woodward was a complete embarrassment. So Woodward, to digress, gets involved in writing books. And one of the first books he gets involved in writing is this book of a fellow guy from Wheaton, Illinois. And his name is John Belushi. And he gets a call upon Belushi's demise. He gets a call from Judy Jacqueline Belushi, Judy's wife. And Judy, I don't know how to explain this, but Judy loves to party too. Okay. Judy loves to party, and she believes that Woodward calls Woodward to say that John was murdered by Kathy Smith, who injected him with a speedball, and she wants Woodward to look into it. So Woodward says, well, I'm going to need all the documentation of John's career if I'm going to write this book. And it comes from Judy Jacqueline.
Oh, boy.
So Woodward is provided by Judy Jacqueline, and this allows the deep state to really get into Hollywood more. Before Alex Gibney, there was Woodward's book with Wired. And what this allows Woodward to do, he knows nothing about the counterculture, he knows nothing about drugs, he knows nothing about Belushi, he knows nothing about anything. Allows Woodward to do a deep dive into Hollywood because he gets all the private contracts of Belushi. He interviews everyone involved, producers, Mike Ovitz, agents, CAA. He gets embedded with all of these bigwigs in Hollywood for the first time as a deep dive into this Belushi story. And he writes the book, and the entire book is one drug episode after another. And I mean, if you just look up cocaine in the book, in the index, there's 85 different pages of stuff just on the word cocaine. There's different, if you look at the index, look up any drug in the index, he's got 80 pages on each drug. This is every single person around John Belushi freaks out. From Dan Aykroyd to Spielberg to his wife, they go berserk over this book. Huge articles are written denouncing Woodward in Rolling Stone, in The Atlantic, in Vanity Fair, calling Woodward the biggest creep and a liar. that anybody's ever seen, because people know Bellucci. He's a known figure. Did he love coke? Sure, who didn't? But that wasn't his entire life. Woodward makes this book his entire life. He doesn't give a shit about Bellucci. He doesn't care about the book. What he wanted was access into Hollywood, into the studio system. And that's what this book allowed the deep state to get, just like Alex Gibney will get it years later when he begins to do it. This is Michael Chiklis in Wired. It's not a bad film. If you can get a copy of it, it doesn't exist on DVD. I have a couple of VHS copies of it. It's not a bad film at all. I highly recommend looking at it to see what I'm talking about. It's kind of surreal. It's Bellucci's already dead, and we go back. He literally comes out from an autopsy, and we see him as a ghost going around with Ray Sharkey looking over his life. It's really interesting. Other people bailed out on this film, but it was made, and it is a studio picture. I'll tell you that, at least that about it. And Chiklis is very, very good as Bellucci. I got to tell you, he'll eventually be on The Shield. Will people get to know Michael Chiklis a little bit?
He's a good actor.
Great actor. And a great Bellucci. If you can find this, it's from 1981, 82, around there on VHS.
I think I found it, and I'll put it on Locals.
Okay. So anyway, so I watched that, and she then Judy Bellucci then sues Bob Woodward in court over the defamation of John Bellucci and his estate and everything else. Now, Judy Jacqueline Bellucci used to work at National Lampoon, so I have a private story for the audience involving her and my employment there. So anyway, so she was in the art department, Judy Bellucci, when I was at Lampoon. And for some reason, Maddie Simmons, the owner, had her desk, not as anything detrimental to her. This was like some office furniture move or something. They took her desk and they put it in another office for somebody else. I'm not really sure. It had nothing to do with her personally. But she came to work, flipped out, thought she was fired, went home to John, screaming and crying, Maddie took my desk, Maddie took my desk, Maddie took my desk. So Bellucci comes up to the office. We were on 635 Madison Avenue in New York, in Manhattan. And Maddie's out to lunch with these big investors who are investing in movies and stuff, and will, later invest in movies like Animal House and Vacation and everything. So Bellucci, and this is who Bellucci was, he gets up on Maddie's desk and he opens up the desk drawer on his desk, and he pulls down his pants and he defecates into the desk drawer, and he closes the drawer and leaves. And Maddie comes back from lunch with these bigwig executive investors, and he continues the meeting after lunch. They had a couple of drinks and they're sitting around laughing, and Maddie begins to smell something coming from his desk drawer, Eric, and he opens it up, and there is a huge pile of feces, and he just yells out the word as loud as you can, Bellucci. He knew that this was Bellucci who did this, and that's who John Bellucci was, for better or for worse. And you could take that with a grain of salt, but that's just my own personal. I also partied with his daughter, with his wife a little bit, and I did party with Aykroyd a lot, and but not with John. I think John had disappeared to the coast and was really abusing drugs at the end. But I did party with most of the other people involved in the book. The point of the matter was, he created a type of journalism, Woodward, where he would get one anonymous source, like Deep Throat, for every single book. Never give up the name. It's someone who's got an axe to grind with everyone else. He would never give up the source, and nobody could ever check the veracity of his books. This is the problem that people have written about Bob Woodward since day one. And he's written a lot of books since then. One of them, I'll give you an example. We'll get to that in a second, but Vail, the William Casey head of the CIA book, Vail, he claims Woodward to get a deathbed confession from William Casey, who's dying of a tumor in the hospital. And William Casey's wife and the Secret Service and the CIA have all gone on record saying Bob Woodward did not get in the room while he was dying in a hospital, the head of the CIA, which is the basis of this book about Iran-Contra and the CIA at that period of time under William Casey. The wife was completely blown away by this. And he says that Casey claimed that Reagan was involved in all kinds of illegal arms shipments and everything else. And then he dies. Nobody bought this. He was completely ridiculed for this book. And then he writes The Brethren, the one you just showed. And The Brethren is another anonymous source, which is not so hard to figure out because there's only a couple of Supreme Court justices up there. And it's
and let me guess, the one that was treated nicely in the book is probably the source.
It's Potter Stewart. It's Potter Stewart, the Supreme Court justice who's railing against Warren Burger, the Supreme Court Chief Justice, and it's obvious that it's Potter Stewart. And articles are written about this book and how he's using this one source who despises this guy. Anyway, his entire style of journalism is based on this deep throat model of a source that I'm never going to tell you who it is, but you have to believe me that it's completely true.
Trust me, bro.
Trust me, bro. I'm the man. And I'll tell you something else. This situation, I just wanted to get back to the situation because it's getting a little late, but the Mora Radford affair, as it was called, with Thomas Mora. Investigators went to a guy named Melvin Laird. Now, Melvin Laird, you may know, was Secretary of Defense. Melvin Laird said in a phone interview that Bob Woodward briefed Alexander Haig. Admiral Thomas Moore said in a phone interview that Bob Woodward briefed Alexander Haig. The reporters who got these phone calls secretly taped have put them on a website, which I'm going to put on Locals, and you can listen to it yourself because they confronted Bob Woodward about this. They gave him one last chance, and they said, "Did you brief Alexander Haig?" And Woodward went berserk. He said, "Anybody who tells you that is an effing liar. I never briefed General Haig. Tell me who said it." He goes absolutely crazy. And they said, "We're not going to tell you." And he goes, "Why not? I demand to know." And the guy laughed and he says, "Because we have anonymous sources just like you, bro." Teasing the guy. And then they published the two names I just told you, two reputable big names. How about the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Melvin Laird, the Secretary of Defense? Those are the two guys that Bob Woodward did not know would rat him out.
That's a pretty good name to do it.
Right. And I've listened to the audio tapes. We'll put a link of it up for local subscribers only and let you listen to these tapes yourself. But you could take it to the bank, my friends. This guy, Bob Woodward, is not who he appears to be. And that's why I wanted to just get him out of the way for this episode as we start this Watergate fallacy and we go down this road. By the way, General Haig, who organized the Bay of Pigs, was known as El Pollo by the Cubans because he danced around like a chicken. Yeah, that's how he strutted around like a rooster or a chicken.
Wow. Crazy times. But we'll be following.
Any questions? Any questions so far?
Yeah, lots of questions. No. Hold on. I want to ask a question about this because he looks like such a goofball.
Okay, that's his first wife. I'll just tell you this: she called him ruthless. This is his first wife. He gets out of the Navy. He's in San Diego on board the ship, and they're living in a naval apartment in San Diego. So she wants to go a graduate degree at UC Berkeley to finish off her education, and he's going to live off of her while he writes novels. He had written a novel while at Yale. It was so bad that he threw it in the garbage. It was rejected by every publisher, and he threw it away. So he wants to become a writer, and he agrees to live off that woman, his wife, right there, his first wife. I think he has 3 wives. He just keeps getting married over and over again. So they move up to Berkeley to do this, where she's going to go to graduate school. And he says, I got to go to D.C. I just got a job at the Washington Post. Goodbye. Or the Pentagon, the briefing job at the Pentagon. And she says, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, good luck." And he leaves his wife to go take this job in the Pentagon and the Situation Room and do the briefing thing of Haig. And she eventually, a year or two later, divorces him.
Yeah, classy.
Classy operation. She called him ruthless, was the line that I read about her.
Well, he probably kind of has to be doing half of what he did.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't travel in those circles. You don't climb that high.
No. Absolutely not. I mean, this guy, it's a fascinating story about how this guy got to where he was. It's just an amazing story. Yeah, Bernstein's a completely different story, and we'll do Bernstein separately. It's a radically different story than this guy, and they did not get along. I'll tell you this. How about this one? 1979, there's a guy who's breaking up with his girlfriend, and he says, "Can I move in with you?" And he says, "What?" He says, "Yeah, you can move in with me, bro. Bros before hoes." And the guy moves into Woodward's house, and he has a bedroom there for like, I don't know, months. He just lives with Woodward, and his name, Gary Hart.
Wow.
Yeah, deep state operation against Gary Hart. Wait for the episode, Eric.
That is insane.
Thank you.
All right. We have a few super chats, things like that coming in. I'm going to start with a rant. I won't say the platform, but I will say that it's a rant.
Really?
Freddy65 said, "Loving this, but I'm going to have to watch it at least 2 more times to take it all in."
Yeah, me too. I'm going to have to watch it again. There's so much stuff I can't get to it all today. I'm just inundated with information. I just wanted to give you a sample of it.
Makes sense. Okay. Jim Koblinski is a new member. Thank you very much. And Jim actually sent a super thanks earlier, which is really cool. Like on videos that are already out there, some people will drop a tip or a super thanks on them, which we deeply appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
Rex Stokes is a new member.
By the way, the ROTC standard was 6 years, not 5. He does the 5 with the Situation Room briefing, but the mystery has always been what happened to year 6. And he poo-poos it. He has told so many different stories, Eric, about the 6th year of his ROTC contract. Yeah. Was it at the serving in this newspaper in Montgomery County?
I was going to say, perhaps he was still on the job.
Right.
So I don't know. And speaking of my service, though, because there are different factors, but that was right in the height of Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
So
and he says
they weren't releasing people that easily.
Oh, no. Right. He says he calls up his handler, his military handler, and he says, "I can't go to Vietnam. I'm going to die there. I think I'm going to end up in the Mekong Delta." This is him saying this. "I think I'm going to end up in the Mekong Delta aboard a gunship, and I'm going to die there. Can I get on board a destroyer?" And getting aboard a destroyer means that you're not going to be in the shit as much as being on a gunboat, like John Kerry was. You're going to be aboard a destroyer doing communications. And somehow he ends up on the destroyer.
Must be nice.
Yeah. I think some of it might be about his father, though.
It could be. As a matter of fact, what was that name? Maybe it had something to do with this.
Is that look at that. There's a building that they have at Yale just for themselves. Look at that. That's top secret, boy. It's like one of these things, like I always say about the Mossad. People throw it around like, all these different things. You never hear about the CIA of China. It's like you hear Skull and Bones. It's almost like a TV show, Skull and Bones, but you never hear about Book and Snake.
It's kind of like that with the SEALs now. Now you hear
yeah. They just get into pop culture, and it really diminishes the importance of veracity or whatever about the organization. That's kind of where Skull and the Bohemian Grove. How many times are we going to see Alex Jones over the Bohemian Grove? How many people are going there now?
Well, by the way, O'Keefe's going over there.
What's that?
James O'Keefe's going to the Bohemian
Grove.
Yeah. But invited.
I know.
So kind of go. Okay, this is interesting. All right, Pamela Clifton said, "Happy Tuesday, guys. Thank you very much." And Jason Willis has been a member for 5 months, said, "Happy Taco Tuesday, everyone."
Thank you.
And then the great Dick Dickerson comes in with 10 memberships for folks.
This guy's a rock star.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he is sharing with everybody, which we deeply, deeply appreciate. Then he said, "How dare Mark try to ruin my membership gifting streak?"
Dude, he's an addictive gifter. He's addicted to gifting.
I never thought of that. A gifter versus a grifter.
Right. Gifter and grifter. It's the opposite side of the same coin.
They should be together.
Well, they're the opposite sides of the coin.
Right. But there's a perfect harmony, right?
Yeah.
TB said, "Didn't agree with your Chappaquiddick take, but you are spot on with Bob Woodward, Deep Throat, and the Nixon coup d'etat."
Why should I believe you now? You didn't take my Chappaquiddick take. Why should I listen to you, bro? Thanks for the $5. I'm standing by my Chappaquiddick take.
BTK. W&B were stenographers for Deep Throat. Weeks ago, I said that felt was not Deep Throat, and you poo-pooed it. You now owe me 2 vacuums and a Pasha one.
Let me delineate a little bit. There was no Deep Throat. It's a combination of various people. The bulk of it coming from General Haig, a coup d'etat. I hope you like coup d'etats more than you like Deep Throat, because Deep Throat doesn't really amount to a coup d'etat. What Haig was doing was a military coup d'etat. Mark Felt was just a guy that did provide a certain amount of help and trying to undermine Nixon, but not at the level of General Haig. Not at the level of General Haig. That's I couldn't explain it back then without giving you this. It's not, I couldn't explain it back then, but I'm explaining it now, if that helps.
Kind of like another assassination previous.
Yeah.
This one's just with character.
Yeah.
Al Gonzalez, in 2021, I was hired by the family to play the pipes at G. Gordon Liddy's funeral service in Poughkeepsie, New York. I'll show you a photo on Saturday night.
Oh, that's great. I can't wait to see that.
That is great. And actually,
and I'll tell you something. In Liddy's defense, he was not privy to any of this shit. He was not part of this coup d'etat. He is the only guy who's not CIA, who's ex-FBI, who comes out of Poughkeepsie, who was going to run for office up there and is given a government job to allow what's his name to win that congressional seat up there, and he's given the job in Washington, and he takes it as a gift. But Liddy is not involved in this, oddly enough.
All right. Well, Al is reminding me of something else, and that is this.
Go ahead. What do you have today? Whoa, whoa, whoa. Oh my God.
All right, we are going to be in West Palm Beach this coming Saturday.
Okay.
Us, Viva Fry. You never know who's going to show up. Phil Holloway is going to be
Holloway is going to be there. What about tickets? Can somebody still get a ticket?
They absolutely can. There are a few available.
Here's my offer. Here's my offer to people. This is one time only. I'm just going to put this out there. If the last 5 people, could be the final 5, buy this ticket, the final 5, each one of you, and we'll be able to see that, I guess, because we'll see who buys the tickets. Each one of you will receive the Groubert stuffed teddy, personally, each one, the incredible hat of America's Untold Stories, and this incredibly odd colored America's Untold Stories shirt that you could wear at the event. Each one of you, the last 5.
All 5. All of them.
The last 5. All 5. The last 5. Not just some random 5. The final 5. You heard of the final 4? This is the final 5. Whoever of the final 5, and each one of you will receive all 3 of those products. And we'll give it to you there or mail it to you or something. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, mail might be easier for packing things up.
Yeah, we'll mail it to you.
Definitely get it.
Don't worry about it. But the final 5, and it's not the next 5. It's the final 5, whoever they are. And I think we're up against a ticking clock. So pretty soon the final 5 are going to be determined because the event's Saturday, and we'll give a little plug on Friday when we do the we'll be there already, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, we're going to be in town on Friday, absolutely. And you can actually shoot your phone at your TV or whatever you're watching on, hit that UPC code, or QR code. Sorry,
QR code. Yeah.
I'm aging myself.
Yeah.
And that will take you to the website, or you could just look in the description and click on the link. Or if you're listening, it's americasuntoldstories.com/events, and come on by and check it out. I think you're going to have a really good time. You'll get to meet Al Gonzalez. We're there. Phil Holloway's now going to be there. Who knows? Maybe somebody else will show up.
Mrs. Viva. Mini
Viva's
Vivas.
definitely there.
Maybe mini Vivas.
Possibly. And you know what? To help you have the energy to get off your asses, to literally buy the tickets, why don't you get some coffee?
That coffee is pretty good. I got it the other day. I got off my fat ass, and apparently it says that right on the label.
Yes, it does.
It says that right on the label. If you drink it, it'll get you off your fat ass.
Yes, and not get you off, get us off, because I have to get off my fat ass every day too. And it is fantastic coffee. Again, there's a link in the description. We've had really, really good feedback. I love this stuff personally. I'm stoked. My official bags came in. All I had was a sample pack, and I had to buy some and get it in. But it is fantastic. It is replaced adrenaline injection, which is a very fine coffee on its own. But as Phil Pepin said, that I'm giving it the ex-girlfriend treatment. It is not ghosted.
Who's Phil Pepin? How does he fit into it?
He's Moondo's.
Oh, okay. All right. I don't know. Good guy. Good guy.
And but this coffee is excellent.
Mm-hmm.
I think all of you will really, really enjoy that. And let me see. We've got some more super chats that came in. So Bob Woodward was TYT before TYT.
What's TYT?
The Young Turks. It's
I don't know.
YouTube channel ran by Cenk Uygur out of California. At your way.
I don't understand the connection to that,
it's the quote biggest news channel on YouTube, and it's a total leftist organization.
Well, he was not a leftist. He's not a leftist at all. He was this was a military coup because they perceived Nixon to be selling out the country. And this was a way to get him out of power. He was not impeached. He did not stand trial. He was forced out. And we're going to get into why he was forced out when we get into that. Some of it is sexual. Some of it is blackmail against Nixon. There's a lot of material that you're going to hear as we get into this series. You're going to need a trading card for each player.
Yes, and I'll have to get working on that. Still have some Kennedy cards that are going to be coming too. So
okay, all right. Well, we'll bring those to the meetup. Maybe people
more to come.
Yeah.
Well, there's going to be a merch table there, but what we're doing is Sarah, who does a lot of the merchandise and makes it for us, will be there.
Oh, good.
Table. But the cool thing is that people can look at the stuff, see what they think, and then it'll just get shipped to them later, rather than trying to figure out, put it in luggage.
That's better. That's much better. Yeah, that's much better. So you pick it out, and then it's sent to you.
Yeah, it makes more sense.
That's much better.
All right,
otherwise, they got to try it on and crap and everything else.
Well, exactly. Yeah. How do you get the sizes if it's food or t-shirts? Stick. Good show, guys. One of your pictures look like Wally Bingham of McHale's Navy. Okay.
It's probably Wieslander. But these were members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. These were serious players. All of this is O&I, by the way, Office of Naval Intelligence, which is what Woodward was. And by the way, the Naval College was also attended to, and Annapolis was attended by General Alexander Haig.
What's he doing as a general? That's odd.
I know. He also was co-director of West Point. He was the NATO Supreme Command. Dude, his resume is insane. But one thing I found out that he ran the Naval College and went to Annapolis.
That is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Like I said.
And he also said that everyone briefed him of every single service. He took briefings from every single person, including whoever the guy Fletcher Prouty was, replaced him.
Well, that makes sense when he's high enough in the government, but
he's just an aide to Kissinger, Eric, at this point. He's just an aide, along with Higbee and Butterfield's the aide to Haldeman. All three of these bitches are trying to take down Nixon.
Well, there's an author that I've read from time to time. I always liked what he said, though. His name is P.T. Duderman, but he said that the most dangerous person in the world, in the military, is, as he put it, the horse holder. He said the person who holds the horse for the general, who's in every room, in every meeting, has every connection, and can gatekeep, can stop information flow, and this really fits that description very well.
General MacArthur had a guy in Korea who was his aide de camp and aide, and guy, and his name was General Haig.
There we go.
Yeah,
generational pass on.
Dude, Haig is everywhere, bro. It's completely. I'll just finish with the Haig. I'm getting more into Haig episode, but Haig in 1988. Will run for the Republican nomination for president of the United States. That's where this is going. That's where this was going.
Well, you know.
And famously, when Hinckley shoots Reagan, he says, I'm in charge here in the White House. I mean, that Bush wasn't there. He was en route. And General Haig meets the press in the Oval Office. And I don't know the Oval Office, but in the White House, and says, I'm in charge here.
Yeah.
This was a guy who wanted to be the king.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was wired in, that's for sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right. Scott Benbow, going back to Mexico this weekend, will report back on my ghost subscribers campaign.
Right on, bro. Be careful down there. It's crazy.
But subscriptions are welcome.
Yeah.
If I start to see people viewing from Mexico, I'll be like, oh, hey, Scott's on the case.
Scott's hooked him up.
BTK.
Dude, if we pay the drug cartels, can they get us some subscribers? If we pay the Mexican drug cartels after this dies down and they're looking for new avenues of revenue?
Possibly.
Will we need swimsuits? Yeah, you're going to need a swimsuit.
Yeah,
absolutely.
This is the time of year where it's getting to the last barely tolerable time of year. It's starting to lean into the warm. And then Rustus Android said, I meant propaganda paid for by the deep state.
I meant propaganda paid for by the deep state in reference to what?
It must be an earlier comment. I don't know the context.
I don't know.
I have a terrible short-term memory, so that is rough. Do you saw that bell?
Oh, yeah, I do have the bell because I'm concerned about certain bell-related issues regarding how we're stuck on 110,000 subscribers. I just want to say something. What do we have? 20 million viewers who viewed the show?
Views. I mean, we have over 22 million views.
22 million views. We got 110,000 subscribers. I did an anecdotal study on my own, and I'm an idiot. It seems that the average conversion rate is 1 out of 50. Every 50 views, you get a subscriber. This is just anecdotal on my part. I looked at about 20 channels, different sizes, and it's about 1 out of 50. We are 1 out of 200, folks. That means 200 people watch this channel and 199 tell us to go fuck ourselves. I find it bizarre. It probably is not true. There may be some other forces at work other than just people saying, there's no way I'm watching this channel and ever subscribing. 199 people out of 200, or 200 out of 200. Let me put it that way. It's the 201st person is the one who subscribes. But maybe the 200th person hears the bell in his head, and the other people do not hear the subliminal Pavlovian dog bell that makes you subscribe. And that's my new theory, which is why I wanted to do the bell and see if it works on a Pavlovian level to help people to subscribe to the channel, because God knows we've tried everything else. This is just the last ditch effort to try to get this going. So maybe some money will come in eventually. And now we're going to do the official bell of justice at this time. So please rise at home for the clanging of the bell. And there it is, my friends. There it is. The incredible bell. You can begin the subscriptions right about now. But seriously, I mean, we've been stuck on 110, 105, 9, 10, whatever. It seems like years.
Yeah, well, let's get triple ones just soon. That'd be nice.
I'd like to get to 250, 200, somewhere in there. I mean, some normal rate. It looks like we're men.
Well, would you look at that? We're 4 subscriptions away from 111,000.
Okay, well, is there 4 people?
There's 2,800.
Maybe the 5 people
watching.
who are buying the ticket to get the shirt, hat, bear collection could also subscribe at the same time.
Yeah, that could be. And Trey Ellswick said, thanks from one of 200. So thank you, Trey. Not only a subscriber, but also.
I just don't believe the math. I just don't believe the mathematics of it.
Rustus Android said Bob Woodward used books to sell deep state propaganda like TYT uses the internet in modern day. Okay. That
boy, that's a stretch, but I'll accept it.
Yeah,
I mean, it was before the internet. It was these books were and are, and it continues. I mean, he's got so many books. I mean, there's the Obama's Wars, The War Within, State of Denial, The Secret Man, the story of Watergate's Deep Throat. The Choice, which I never heard of. The Choice.
He writes a book a year, doesn't he?
94, 96, 96. There's 2 in 96. Then 2000, and then 2002, Plan of Attack, Road to War 2004. It seems like every 2 years.
Okay.
But yeah, he was promoted to assistant managing editor of the Washington Post in 1981. And that's where the Janet Cook scandal occurs, which I vaguely remember the Janet Cook scandal. I did not know that he had vouched for her and had hired her and had gone to the mat for her. That's bizarre.
Maybe he had a crush on her.
Yeah, could be.
I don't know, but folks, we are going to head over to locals to
talk about Nixon's sex life.
Yes,
I'm going to talk about Nixon's sex life over there. Don't try to stop me. If you don't want to come over to locals and hear about Nixon's sex life, it's up to you.
All right, links in the description. We'll see everybody there.